both. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, former Marine, human rights advocate, and CEO of Vet Voice Foundation, Janessa Goldbeck. Welcome back, Janessa.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thanks for joining me. Honestly, our regular audience members might remember when you were on last year and we were discussing your film War Game, which was a documentary that imagined a nationwide insurrection in which members of the U.S. military kind of chose to defect in order to support a Trump-like character who had lost the election but refused to admit that loss. And it was, the movie played like a thriller. It was such a good film where you had all these senior officials from the last 5 presidential administration dealing with the crisis in the White House Situation Room, and they were given 6 hours to either save democracy or take us into a civil war. And I would highly recommend people go back and listen to that or even watch that film because it really gets you into the mindset of what people are supposed to do and the level of expertise these people in these rooms are supposed to have. But that particular scenario didn't play out. So Trump won. And yet it still feels like we're bordering on violence and insurrection anyway. So where do you see America at this moment in time?
Wow, that's a tough question.
Yeah.
It feels like a very dangerous moment. There are so many things that are happening that are not just norm shattering, but truly testing the fabric of our system. Checks and balances, the power of the judiciary, the power of Congress. Any sort of restraint on the executive. It feels like we are in a time now where all of the sort of branches of government, civil society, people and firms and institutions that have independence are ceding that to the president in a way that feels really unlike the vision of America that I had growing up.
Yeah, I think the vision of America that most of us had growing up and what we thought we had behind us with, our institutions and checks and balances and that kind of thing. I mean, you and I were scheduled to have this conversation a couple of days ago, but we put it off until today, Monday the 21st, because we wanted to see if Trump declared martial law, if he put the Insurrection Act into account and, basically put military in our streets. And this is what it's come to, right? The American government using the American military against the American people is something that we actually have to discuss. And I think we have to be clear that Trump is kind of chomping at the bit to use the military against the American people. And he clearly thinks the American military work directly for him, that they should be doing his bidding, much like you would play with little soldiers if you were a child. That is kind of how I think Donald Trump sees the military. I think personally he would like to use nuclear weapons just to see what happened. Like he just wants to be the guy that presses the button, right? Like it makes me very anxious to have this kind of character in charge. The question is, would our military go along with that? Especially with all the yes men that he's put in charge around him. As a military expert and someone that works with military people all day and someone that's been in the military yourself for so long, what is the general sense of if the Insurrection Act was put into account, how the military itself would respond to that?
Well, I think the first thing that you mentioned is really important to talk about, which is that he's sort of undermined the function of the military as an independent entity by firing generals, senior leaders, purging the ranks of people he believes are woke simply on the basis of their race or gender. These are 30-year combat career officers who've been purged because they are not sufficiently loyal to Donald Trump. The generational harm of that on its own is like not getting enough attention, in my opinion. And I know that there are people who are choosing to not re-up their contracts or retire because they're like, I didn't sign up to serve one man. I pledged an oath to the Constitution. So that on itself is really alarming. The Insurrection Act is, I think a lot of Americans have been learning about what it is over the last week as reporting has been going on about this 90-day report that was supposed to be due on Sunday. As of this morning, it seems that I can't even bring myself to call him the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, but former Fox News host Pete Hegseth and Kristi Noem have not recommended the use of it right now. But what's really challenging about the Insurrection Act is it is an authority that gives the president basically complete power over the military to federalize active duty military troops, to deploy them domestically, to suspend posse comitatus. And all of that is lawful, but awful. And so if you are serving in the military right now and the president gives you a lawful order, you are obligated by your oath to follow it. And I think that's where so many of us who are veterans or who have served are looking at the possible invocation of the Insurrection Act under very challenging circumstances and saying, like, well, if I were in that position in this moment, like, that would be a lawful order from the president. And so it's putting our military officers and our troops in this really, really challenging position where they may be asked to do some sort of immigration enforcement or deportation or whatever it is under a technically lawful order. Or the president might just come out and say, hey, even if it seems unlawful, I'm going to pardon you anyways, just like I did for the J6ers. And so it's just a really, really awful moment. I can't even imagine what it's like to be in uniform right now.
Yeah, no, honestly, I mean, you were giving some background on the Insurrection Act in general, and I want people to understand that the Insurrection Act, it's like a 200-year-old law. This is not like we wrote it, in the past decade. And the president really does get almost complete power over the military inside the United States. But it has been used in the past. Like, I don't want people to think it's never been used, that Donald Trump is pulling this out of nowhere, but it's always been a last resort, right? To restore order, to protect civil rights, to respond to some sort of genuine breakdown in public safety, not to, get your own way in everything that you want. President Lincoln used it during the Civil War. Grant used it against the Ku Klux Klan. President Johnson used it to end school segregation. Bush used it during the LA riots. So it has been used. It has been invoked, but for a short period of time to sort of quell something, to help with something, to make it better for the American people, not to make it easier for the American president to do what the American president wants. But the problem is what you were saying, it's written to be incredibly broad, which makes it really ripe for abuse if it's being used by a president with authoritarian tendencies, because the act doesn't require any sort of congressional approval, not that he's going through Congress at all right now anyway. It's just sort of a presidential proclamation, and then bam, the military can be in our streets, right? So I think that's the tough position that our military will be in, because they're not supposed to be involved in civilian law enforcement. That's a very big part of the military, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's posse comitatus. That is a law that says that the military doesn't do domestic law enforcement unless it's suspended via the Insurrection Act. And I think about who is in uniform. We are, people who are wearing the uniform are members of the society. There are from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, many immigrants, many family of immigrants. You sign up to serve and defend your country, to defend the Constitution, to defend the system of democracy, and then you're being asked to, patrol the streets, potentially deport people from your community, go into places, do a mission that you are not trained to do, which puts you and the people that you're interacting with in a lot of danger. It's just it's a big misuse. And I think of this president, as you said at the top, he is he wants to press the button. He's a TV president. He wants to see armored vehicles in the streets of Chicago. He wants to see people responding to his authoritarian tendencies, and he wants those visuals. And so I don't think he cares at all about, a system of government or checks and balances or any of that. He just wants to see his power displayed as little green men in the streets. And so it's very frightening, both in terms of the people in uniform who may be asked to carry out these types of missions, but also for everyday Americans. There is a reason why we love our country. And the thing that everyone across the political spectrum will tell you is it's freedom, right? Well, what does freedom mean? I think fundamentally it means freedom from fear. And what the invocation of the Insurrection Act, what this sort of escalation, this militarization of our society, of our democracy means, is creating more fear. And nobody wants to see that except for, I guess, President Trump and those who are enabling him.
Yeah, those who are enabling him, those he surrounded himself with. I mean, the thing is, the first time he was president, he was surrounded by people who were still what we call the adult in the room, the Mark Milley type characters that were like, no, you can't shoot protesters in the knee. No, you can't, use the military against our people. I think he would have loved to put out the Insurrection Act during Black Lives Matter, but of course he didn't even consider using it during the January 6th riots, right? He wasn't like, geez, call in the military, they're attacking the Capitol. That didn't even occur to him. He wanted there to be pushback from the left, and then he could call it out on us. I think that was sort of the goal. I think we should be clear that it's it's not technically military, or it's not technically martial law, the Insurrection Act. The military in as